Hello, good evening. Hi, everybody. So I'm going to pull some handles straight off of a mug. So they'll end up looking something about like this. So I started off with a ball of clay, and I'm just starting to roll that out into a simple coil. I'm not overly concerned with getting a super flat or super round coil because I'm gonna kind of de-round it anyways. So I've got this coil and I flatten it on two sides. It's about the width of my thumb, which I have a pretty big thumb, but I want it about as thick as I want my attachment point on my mug. So the ends of the coil usually end up being kind of goobery anyways. So I'm not going to worry about those too much. I'm going to cut those off right away, actually. And for these, I kind of, made enough of the handles where I know about how much to do. So I use about a hand width of this for these mugs. One way that you can guesstimate to start with is, because you always want a little extras, you need about as length as far as you're going to go. So if I'm going from here to here, I need about that much clay. So the first thing that I'm going to do is take a serrated rib, dip it in the water, and just slip and score, or wet and scratch, the end of my handle here. Then I'm going to find where I want my attachment to be, which is going to be right here. I'm just going to rock that back and forth, and you'll notice it leaves a nice little spot there. So I'm going to take my scratching tool and wet and scratch again. I'm dipping it in the water in between and go back and forth. And then wherever I attach it down here, which is going to be right about there, I'm going to score a little bit. Wet and scratch. There we go. So the end of this is going to get stuck right on there. And I push in the middle first, and then I work my way off to either side. So I'm start pushing in the middle and then working towards either side. Now these mugs, you'll notice they do bend a little bit, but they're a firm leather hard. So I'm not going to deform them too much. And when I'm finally done, they will get covered. I've got a sponge here that I'm just wiping off. I've got this rubber shaper tool from Royal Sovereign. It's the company name. It is the 10 millimeter chisel tip. So I'm just cleaning up this attachment here. There we go. All right. So that's all attached now. And I'm ready to pull. So instead of getting my hand all wet, what I do is I actually dip the handle into my bucket so that my handle is wet. And then I'm grabbing it like this. I go up the bottom. So I grab some of that water, and then I start gently pulling back and forth, just like this, and I'm pulling straight off the mug like that. And going back the other way, I'm pulling straight off the mug like that. And I'm doing it pretty gently. I might have to dip it in the water again because I don't want to pull it clean off. And then once it's long enough, I'm going to stick it right down where I made my scratch marks, flip it like this. I'm going to take my wire knife, cut off the extra, and now I have a nice neat end to it. I'm going to get my thumb pad wet, just a little wet, smooth this off, And there's a lot of different ways that you can choose to attach your bottom or how you smush it down. This is what I like it to look like. I just make sure there's no sharp spots. Now's your chance to clean everything up so it looks neat. There we go. Now, that's not quite the right shape handle that I want to have on my mug. So I'm going to get my pointer finger wet. And I'm lifting up on the top of this to start to change the shape up here. I'm going to pull down on the bottom a little bit to make sure that that comes down so I can fit my hands in a little easier. Smoothing this out. Going to line that back up. I got a little nick on the top. And that makes me pretty happy. And I'm going to put my stamp on it. The old seal of approval. And I'm set. I'm going to walk through this again a little quicker in the next two mugs. All right, so for the second mug, I'm going to do it at a little different angle for you, all right? So I have my bit of clay that I'm cutting part of it off. This is the same piece of clay that I rolled out earlier. I'm going to take my serrated rib and just move that a little bit. And then I'm going to pick a spot to stick it on. And I'm going to roll that right along there so that leaves a mark. Then I'm going to wet and scratch. Wet and scratch where my attachment is and where my bottom attachment is. So I'm planning ahead and getting that taken care of right now. Then the bit of clay that I rolled earlier, I'm going to stick that right on there. You guys can see that's about the size of my thumb, maybe a little skinnier. And I've rolled that the size that I want this attachment to be. So this attachment point here that I'm working on attaching, starting in the center, working its way out. So I'm basing the size of my coil on how big I want that attachment to be. If you want a smaller attachment, roll a smaller coil. If you want a bigger attachment, roll a bigger coil. So again, I'm taking my rubber shaper and I'm just cleaning that up a little bit. There we go. And now I can start to pull it. So I dipped this in the water. My hand's starting at the bottom, going up and then down. And I'm barely applying any pressure. And then I rotate it back and forth the other direction. Dip it in the water again. I want to make sure that this is well lubricated so I don't pull it off the side of the mug. And you'll notice how I'm going back and forth, and every once in a while I'm going to pull this way. Pulling this way is going to make it skinnier. All right? If I need to, I can take my fingers and clean this part up a little bit right up next to the attachment. But that's pretty good. I'm just going to finish cleaning it up a little bit. I'm letting gravity pull it down. And then up a little bit, sticking it right where my scratch was. Then I'm going to get rid of my extra. And then my thumb's wet, so I can smush this on really well. Clean this up. Now, the shape of the handle is not quite what I want, and I want to look at the negative space here. So I'm going to take this part, and I'm going to push this up a little bit. Okay, so that's closer to what I want. And then this part, I'm going to make a little bit more room down farther. Pull this down a little bit. And I'm just tweaking the shape and refining it a little bit. It's easier to fit your fingers in, and I like the shape of it a lot more. Now that I'm done, I can give it the stamp of approval. Awesome. All right, we've got one different angle left for the last mug. So we've got the mug right here. And again, I'm going to take my serrated rib, get it wet, scratch the top of there, stick that on the edge of my mug, wet and scratch, wet and scratch, wet and scratch. There we go. And the bottom will be right about right there. And if your clay is a little soft, sometimes it'll push in. You can always take your finger on the inside and push the clay right back out where it needs to be. So next I'm going to take this, I'm going to stick it right on there. And I'm going to apply pressure from the center, working towards the outer edge of the attachment. From the center, working towards the other side. And I'm just rounding this out a little bit, making sure the fattest part lines up with this decorative band I put around when I was throwing the piece. And now I'm going to clean it up with my rubber scraper. I wipe my rubber scraper off on a sponge, just like that, between uses. Okay, so you get the slip on there, and I'm just scraping that off on my sponge. Do it the other way. There we go. And now it's ready to pull. So I dip the handle in, not my hand, dip the handle. And I'm putting my hand this shape right here, or you can kind of do a rounder shape depending on what you want your handle to look like. I like mine being a little wider, so I hold my hand like this, and then I flip it the opposite direction. So you'll notice I'm flipping it back and forth. I'm pulling my handle straight off. I might clean up this attachment area with my fingers like that. I'm just using the tip of my finger, my fingertips. There we go. And not quite long enough, so I'm going to pull just a little more. You want to kind of go back and forth. Do it perpendicular once or twice so you don't get a sharp edge on it. There we go. We'll stick that. I'm going to cut off the extra so I've got a clean line at the bottom of my handle. I've got a wet thumb, so I'm going to smooth that off and push this into the piece. There's a lot of slip from pulling the handle on the handle already, so I don't need to really worry about slipping anymore. And I already had scored it earlier. Now I'm going to take my pointer finger. I'll get that a little wet. And this is like a saggy D. That's like, don't make a handle like this. This is really far away from the mug. So if you're holding your hand, you know, over here, that's a lot. You want your hand to be as close as you can and still have wiggle room. So I'm going to lift up here and smooth that clay out. So it's getting closer, and I kind of like the shape of this, but I'm going to pull the bottom down just a little bit. Right down there. So I'm just tweaking this ever so slightly until it's the shape. And so the outside of this went from being out here to being out here. So your fingers, when they hold them, are a lot closer to the side of the mug. Then, if I've got any fingerprints or anything on there, all I'm going to do is I'm just going to run my finger right over the outside of it real gently. And the inside, make sure I don't have any sharp bits. If I need to take my rubber shaper and clean up right down here, I'll do that. And once it's all done, I'll give her the seal of approval and we'll sign it with my stamp. So, there you have it. That's how you pull a mug handle straight off the mug. It takes a lot of practice, but with some perseverance, I'm sure you can figure it out. Good luck potting, folks.